just want to make sure that you're aware of this is how they're safeguarding the information. Interestingly enough, for this, the agency that enforces this is called the Office of Civil Rights, and it's part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. They hold people accountable for regulations dealing with HIPAA, and I believe, I'd have to look it up, but I believe I remember reading it somewhere. Each record violation is a $50,000 penalty for each violation of one record for HIPAA compliance. All right, we talked a little bit about this, and now I want to jump into this here, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act of 1999. So with the GLBA here, this was known as the Financial Services Modernization Act, and it was enacted on November 12th of 1999. And what it did is it allowed the regulatory agencies to make sure that monopolies could not be created on financial institutions. So around this time frame, you may recall that there was a company called Citibank. So Citibank was the reason why this law was created, because when Citibank became Citigroup, they merged with the Travelers Inc., which is a huge insurance company. So you have a huge financial company merging with an insurance company, and essentially ends up being able to manipulate sides of the wall. Remember, we talked about in the models of security, the Chinese wall model, where you try to avoid the organizational conflict of interest. So when we try to avoid that OCI, that is the, anybody remember what that's specifically called? Chinese wall? Clark Wilson? Graham Denny? One of those two, right? Somebody look it up, see what it is. But that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that no one entity has too much pull. Brewer-Nash. There we go. We all were wrong. We knew it was one of them though, right? So Brewer-Nash tries to avoid the conflict of interest where you have to remove yourself from being able to do it. So around this time, and coupled with September 11th, you can think about how some of the various financial entities out there, like Bank of America, Citigroup, started to let the bottoms come out of mortgages. And I know that we were affected in taking out mortgages for that. But that is because these mergers were allowed to happen prior to this GLBA Act to be enacted. So when this was, they put a hold on any significant merger between any of the large companies out there, to say that it has to have approval from the Security and Exchange Commission before they can allow the merger to happen. Otherwise, everybody and their grandma who has all the money would start swallowing up all these conflict of interest left and right. So, you know, this is why this was created. So, and it makes sense to me. You know, it makes sense to me. It's an act that prohibits an investment bank, a commercial bank, and an insurance company to merge or come together, combining the banking, securities, and insurances, and offering that up as one. So, of course, you have smart attorneys that would do what? They create a parent company, and then underneath it, they create smaller companies, subsidiaries, right? And from that, they can still own the companies, but now, kind of like Intergraph does, if you're familiar with Intergraph, they have a government side, and then they have a commercial side. And everybody you talk to over there that works for Intergraph will tell you specifically, oh, we have to get approval to talk to those guys. It's like they've been asked 1,000 times, or either have gone through security awareness training 1,000 times to say, this is what you need to say if somebody's asked you that. But to be able to segregate those two specifically is important, because you don't want that conflict of interest. They have the ability to manipulate the market, and that's what we're trying to avoid here. All right, a few more here, and then we'll move on. This Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, the Cfaa, was in 1986, and it was an amendment to an existing Comprehensive Crime Control Act. And what this did is, this was the first mention in the federal government with the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act that there were amendments added that provisioned specific addressing of these things that were unheard of before this point, called a denial of service attack. So the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act was the first to introduce this term in legal form that made it illegal to do a denial of service attack. Specifically in there as well, in 1986, what were you doing? They were also responsible for the first time in a federal act, including a provision for malicious code as well. So we're talking 30 years ago here, right, that this happened. Malicious code, denial of service attack. Recently, President Obama, in 2015, opened the act back up, submitted it back to Congress, and said, hey guys, we need criminal trafficking laws put into this Computer Fraud and Abuse Act that have provisions in them that if people are trafficking passwords or selling user ID and password information on the internet, they need to be criminally prosecuted by the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. So anytime you're showing a password cracking demo and you don't know who is in the crowd and there's an FBI agent in there, you may end up getting a visit afterwards from that person, just to make sure that everything's on the up and up. Okay? All right, two more here, and then we'll take a quick break. The furthest one out that you'll be tested on is this Federal Privacy Act of 1974. So this is before I was born, so I had to do a little bit of research the first time I saw this right here. So this is a code of fair information practice that allows us to collect, maintain, use, and disseminate PII information about individuals that are maintained in systems of records by federal agencies. So you have the right to ask how those federal agencies' record-keeping policies are maintained. And you can actually request access to see what some of those processes and procedures are. I think of one that comes to mind, we just mentioned it, OPM. What is their way that they were protecting that? And a lot of that's already been released. Talked about the open kimono. I think that after that happened, they wanted to just show, hey, you know, we weren't properly funded. We paid this company to do a penetration test, and that was it. So under here, you usually will see how is somebody protecting PII. What do they have in place to make sure that our private information stays private. So keep that in mind whenever you're going through and looking at this one. All right, the last one here that I'm going to talk about, and then we'll go into break, is this one that's called Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act of 2001. Now, if you've ever sat in a government meeting where you're trying to come up with a name for a system, first you come up with the acronym, and then you just shoehorn the best words that fit to that acronym, right? But what a wonderful acronym this is. Here we are 15 years later. In October 26th of 2001, George W. Bush implemented the Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act, which is the USA Patriot Act. So it has an extension that was recently added where President Obama added the extension for 4 more years with 3 key provisions that allows even more strengthening of America and uniting of America by giving more tools available, like roving wiretapes, searches of business records, and conducting surveillance of lone wolves, specifically, individuals suspected of terrorist-related activities that are not linked to terrorist groups. So does that sound familiar? We're seeing this pop up left and right all over the United States. Here we go.